Good evening, everybody. My name is Pérez-Oramas, and I am the Senior Curatorial Director of Nara Roesler, a gallery based in Brazil with operations in Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and New York. The first Brazilian gallery to have an exhibition space in New York, which has now relocated into a larger, beautiful, and new space in the Chelsea neighborhood in Manhattan, a neighborhood that is known for the amount of significant galleries that surround us here. I am very glad to be here celebrating the opening of this new gallery, this new Nara Roesler New York gallery. I am honored to be curating the first opening show for the gallery, and I am here with my colleagues from Nara Roesler New York, Daniel Roesler, and all the team, and of course in connection with our team in Brazil, all of whom were absolutely instrumental to make this dream a reality and to be here today. So, for the opening of the gallery, we thought of a sort of a durational exhibition. Think of theatrical language. When you see a theater piece, or when you go to see an opera, it is a theater piece that actually unfolds in one act, or two acts, or three acts, or an opera in 5 acts or 6 acts. Well, similarly, this is an exhibition that actually unfolds into 5 acts, into 5 chapters. I will be changing the installations of those 5 acts weekly. And to continue with the theatrical analogy, I would say that this opening exhibition is an art opera in 5 acts with 2 apartes, as we say in theater, because the actual space of the gallery is structured into 2 different exhibition spaces that flow into each other. You will see as I will walk towards the exhibition how those is structured. And on the second gallery, on the second space of the gallery, we have installed a group show with other works by other artists represented by Nara Roesler. We thought that this durational structure, this idea of 5 installational acts that unfold in a month, as well as these group exhibitions adjacent to the main installations, the main chapters of the show, was a good way to present in New York a broad roster, a broad perspective on the galleries, on the artists that are represented by the gallery. The show is studied cross-cuts, and actually the idea, I mean, it's a term that comes from filmmaking. We are actually crossing and cutting either bodies of works by different artists or presenting solo shows. The 5 chapters that constitute the exhibition are beginning with a solo presentation of works by Antonio Diaz, an exceptional cluster of works by Antonio Diaz belonging to the Illustration of Art series, all of them from the early 1970s. The second will be a dialogue between an American artist called Ramirez Jonas, represented by Nara Roesler, and Bernard Reale, a Brazilian artist, and it's going to be an installation dealing with the idea of public space, the significance of monuments, the public significance of monuments, the public meaning of monuments, the appropriation of monuments is also related to abuse of power, police abuse in Brazil, which is one of the core interests of Bernard Reale's performances and video. The third one is going to be a perspective on contemporary painting in Brazil today through the work of 3 women artists, Cristina Canale, Karin Lamprecht, and Maria Clavín. The fourth chapter of the show will be a presentation of contemporary sculpture in Brazil today through the work of Arthur Lescher and Milton Machado. And the last chapter will be a solo presentation, and it is this first chapter, which we devote to Antonio Diaz. The last one will be devoted to the great Tomie Otaki, with sculptures that Tomie produced at the end of her life, and a dialogue between the sculptures and paintings. So, during the length of these unfolding 5 chapters, We will also have a second group show in the adjacent gallery. I hope that all this is going to become clear as we walk through the gallery and as we show you the exhibition that we are presenting today and with which we are gladly, happily opening this operation in New York. So, my friend and colleague Paul is a woman camera, and she will follow me as I walk into the first gallery where we have installed the works by Antonio Diaz. I cannot stress enough the exceptionality of these cluster works, the significance, the importance, the absolute uniqueness of these cluster works. They not only are the work of one of the greatest Brazilian artists of the 20th century, they belong to a moment that can be arguably considered a peak, a moment of accomplishment, an acme in his own production, which is the series of works that he titled The Illustration of Art. A series that actually marked, determined the entirety of Antonio Diaz's production. So with this absolute marvelous selection of works, with these jewels of works that actually are in sync, as I will try to convey to you, with so many things and aspects going on in the world in the 1970s, but that still are absolutely timely and relevant today. We think we are opening the new gallery in New York of Nara Roesler in a grand fashion, in a great fashion, in a beautiful manner. So the way I conceive this specific installation, follows one of the signature elements of Antonio Diaz in the Illustration of Art series. As you might see in this polyptych, you have this ritornello, this leitmotif of a straight angle carved into the body of the painting. So what I made here is that I installed on this angle of the space two words that actually, to my understanding, in my opinion, present the formal underpinnings, the formal proposition that is the base of the Illustration of Art series. And on this opposite straight angle, I installed words belonging to that series and presenting those elements, those leitmotif formal elements that constitute and that are present throughout the entire series of the Illustration of Art, but actually that relate to a political reading of the context in which they were made in the early 1970s. The polyptych that actually is one of the emblematic foundational works of the Illustration of Art series is constituted by, as I say, 10 paintings on wood, all of them featuring the same shape, a rectangular, a monochromatic rectangular with a missing corner in different sizes, different dimensions, and a very carefully spacement logic installed against the wall. And this polyptych is accompanied by a text, sort of a cryptic, hermetic, also ironic, sarcastic maybe text that Antonio Diaz utilized at different iterations throughout the building of this series. The text reads, "The Illustration of Art," which is the title of the whole series, "Art, Society, Model, all reduction and enlargement is a matter of accommodation." The general title of this series, "The Illustration of Art," can, first of all, be interpreted as a chiasmus. A chiasmus is this phrasing, this type of phrasing rhetorical type of phrasing where subject and predicate are switched and inverted. Like, for example, when you say the silence of music, the music of silence, or the presence of absence, the absence of presence. I'm talking about the presence of absence and the absence of presence, which is a key element of this, let's say, formal poem, this kind of cipher, formal abstract cipher that Antonio Diaz repeated ceaselessly throughout the illustration of our series, of a whole body with an absent fragment, of, if you want, the fullness of a shape where you can see a missing part of that shape. Antonio Diaz constantly repeated the idea that for him this signature shape that he deconstructed, that he repeated, that he placed in other type of works, in the many works that constitute the illustration of art series, that for him that shape fundamentally conveyed the idea that there is no fullness, that there is no wholesomeness in any form, less in any form of art. That the idea of wholeness, the idea of totality is compromised by the fact that all form is relative to a missing beholder or to a beholder that is about to become, that is about to appear, that is about to be present. So the fullness of meaning, the fullness of shades is a matter of accommodation, is a matter of reception. If you think of the general type of the illustration of art, as many critics have pointed out, Sonia Salstein among them, who has brilliantly written on Antonio Diaz, the word illustration in Latin-based languages like Portuguese or Italian or French or Spanish also means enlightenment, which might be the translation of a very encyclopedic term in German, Aufklärung, and that relates to the idea of the age of enlightenment, the project, the rational project of enlightenment that was set in the Western world in the late 18th century, and that actually ran as a major stream throughout the history of ideas in the Western world up to the mid-20th century. So by 1971, and I have to point out that the series began in 1971 through a Super 8 film that Antonio Diaz shot showing his own arm, wounded and bleeding, and a cross shape of band-aids stitching that wound. And you will see, you can see in that Super 8 film a little drop of blood. So the red and the redness as a color ritornello in this series is important because it is related to the first, if I might say, wound and the first formal cross that appeared in the illustration of art series. By 1971, when Antonio Diaz produced that first iteration of the illustration of art series, what he was trying to convey was voluntarily or involuntarily connected with a whole constellation of events, ideas going on at the time in the Western world. You can name the various upheavals around the 1968 year, from Paris to Latin America to the east of Europe with the invasions of the Soviet Union. You can think of the thinking of semiotics and post-structuralism. One can name the beginning of artificial intelligence and the fundamentals of contemporary cybernetics in the late 60s and early 1970s. We can think of contemporary hermeneutics and the idea that of the open work, of the opera aperta, by someone like Umberto Eco. And I stress the fact that Antonio Diaz lived in Milan, lived in Italy, and was very much in connection with the fundamental movements in art and thinking that were going on in Italy at the time. So, in connection with all that, what is happening in the early 1970s is the first clear manifestation of failure of that Enlightenment project that began in the 18th century. The failure of the rational project of Enlightenment. And we might think that the open question that this series is constantly putting in front of us is what remains from art once Enlightenment is over? What are the remnants of art once the project of Enlightenment is over? Which immediately brings us to the idea of fragment. The impossibility of a totality unfolds into a totality of fragments. And I would like to stress the fact that on the romantic side of the Enlightenment project, from the very early Romanticism in Germany in the 18th century, comes the idea that a work of art is always a fragment, that there is no fullness, that there is this idea of fragment driving through the conception of the very idea of art as a word that we think with a capital A, the call to art, the idea of art as a substitute religion. The age of art is a direct result of the Enlightenment project. So it is really a moment of epistemological mutation and in absolutely in sinking connection with the breaking of that system of thinking of totality that Antonio Diaz starts producing these absolutely landmark series of works. With those formal tools that he said, which are very elemental formal tools. If you might think of a cross, you might think of a cross as obviously a religious symbol, but you might think of a cross as an abstract form, which is actually the ensemble of 4 straight angles. If you keep thinking of these missing angles, you get a cross. And cross, straight angles, straight lines, orthogonal dispositions are the basic language of not only constructivism and suprematism. The cross is a presence in the work of Lissitzky and Malevich, but also cross, straight angles, orthogonal dispositions are the base of concrete language and neo-concrete language, and I refer specifically to a whole Brazilian constellation of abstract words that preceded the generation of Antonio Diaz. With the use of those elements, with the use of those elemental tools, Antonio Diaz was able to produce a political reading of his time, a political reading of his context. Not only in terms of the specific political context, he was able to produce a reading, a political reading of the politics of bodies, with this constant reflection on the skin, constant reflection on the human body as a fragment of a skin that goes through the work of Antonio Diaz in the 80s and in the 90s. He was able to produce a political reading of land, a political reading of territories, with the use of flags, of ground installations. He also practiced printmaking and drawing within the series of the illustration of art. A fundamental core of paintings with the inclusion of language, where the friction between words and phrases and the factuality of painting produce these kind of open questions about fundamental concepts that you can relate either to the failure of the Enlightenment project or to contemporary issues. And of course, the illustration of art is an absolutely key series of works And I am talking here not only from the point of view of Latin America, not only from the point of view of Brazilian art. I think this series is absolutely key. It's a landmark moment in the history of late modernism in general, as probably one of the most acute, subtle, because Antonio Diaz was always showing and featuring an extreme intellectual elegance in all of his works, but also radical question of the politics of language. As in this case, where he almost with a clairvoyance, he sets the abstract dimension of the problem vis-a-vis the linguistic iteration of the linguistic enunciation of the problem. In other paintings, he will include the language with the body of the paintings. So, using those tools, in the early 1970s, he began by looking carefully at what was going on in the political context of the US where he was living. I mean, he was living in Milan. He was expelled from France in 1968 because he appeared in a picture, in a photograph, among the upheaval of May 68. He went to Italy. He got in contact with the fundamental protagonist of the Arte Povera movement in Italy. He participated in the first exhibitions of Arte Povera. He's the only Latin American artist who had a first-hand protagonism in the Arte Povera movement, although he maintained throughout his career an absolute independence of position as an artist. And then he moved to New York in 1972. He lived in New York between 1972 and 1973. And what was going on was the re-election of Richard Nixon, the very complex political situation at the time. We know today that Richard Nixon worked in a way to delay the discussions about the peace in Vietnam in order to win the election against McGovern. That he was re-elected in 1972, and then what unfolded from there, the Watergate scandal and Nixon's resignation. So with that materiality of news, with that materiality of language conveyed through news, related to the political context of the time in the US, Antonio Diaz produced a cluster, an important cluster of works, where he applied his basic formal tools set at the beginning of the Illustration of Art series to the political rhythm of the moment. As in this work, where he used printing techniques, and where we can see that signature shape of a rectangle with a missing corner, with a missing body that is here covering the rest of the news in order to stress, in order to highlight the announcement of the re-election of Richard Nixon. And in these two diptychs that I consider particularly telling about the way Antonio Diaz anticipated contemporary art, 15, 20 years before we might think of what Americans call here the picture generation, Richard Prince and other artists, these works that come from the contemporary language of printmaking, applied to painting as we know Andy Warhol used it in the 1960s, but actually by directly referring to the intrusion of reality through the reading of politics in the body of the work. And these two diptychs are based on a cover of the magazine Newsweek showing a very famous Democrat senator at the time, Senator Sam Irving, who was a complex political figure here in the US, was a senator from the South that was known at the beginning of his career for having supported Jim Crow laws, as you know, the laws that maintain racial segregation in the US. He opposed the very fundamental case of Brown against Board of Education. But then he became in the 1960s a hero of civil rights because he was the first senator pointing out and questioning the intention of the government to use consuming data in order to make policies. So something that is very timely today. We live in the time of the cancellation of the private sphere, of the public reading and using of our private data. he became a figure above that because he was a conservative Democrat. Nixon thought that he could favor him in the process of Watergate. So he was appointed the head of the Watergate Commission, and he was absolutely instrumental in the fall of Richard Nixon. Interestingly enough, because the fundamental dialectics, the fundamental logic that actually formally constitute the main works of the illustration of art is based on the logic of presence and absence, fullness and emptiness. That unfolds into the secular problem of painting as mask, figure as mask, personae, the hiding of a face, facing and facing, and using the very title of the Newsweek magazine, uncovering the cover-up, which actually, of course, relates to Nixon's cover-up of the Watergate events and the uncovering of the cover-up, which actually resulted in Richard Nixon's resignation. But then Antonio Diaz, which also has a constant evocation of the notion of masks in his work, either applied to his own face, intervenes the face of Senator Irving, taking out part of the body, similarly as he took out the fragment of the rectangle that is the signature shape of this series, and then covering, with paint, the cover of the newspaper, the cover of the Newsweek magazine, where we slightly fading, we can see the Newsweek title. Maybe you cannot see that through internet, and then the illustration of art, and then this kind of phantomatic, ghostly face mask here. So the whole, I would say, secular issue of painting as face, of painting as veil, of the power of veiling and unveiling that representation implies, is embedded in these works. I would say that this sum up, the word that actually sums up all these issues is this work that I personally consider an absolute masterwork, a jewel of a work from this moment in Antonio Diaz's production, which actually presents the issue of the missing fragment in the fullness of the shape, but it presents it through painting, through representation. You see, there is no, we can see the entirety of the support, the fullness of the painting, and then the inferior corner is a white monochrome square painted. If you think of white monochrome over red monochrome, if you think of white monochrome over white Malevich, or white monochrome over black, that constant of the constructive kind of languages. But then suddenly the potency of absence is here presented through a very basic form of representation. And adjacent to the painting, a sculpture, or if you want, a three-dimensional painting perpendicularly installed against the wall, where Antonio Diaz presents literally the fragmented rectangle, the literal missing corner extracted from the very material and factual body of the work. The entirety of this logic, the entire logic of fullness and emptiness, the fullness of emptiness, the emptiness of fullness, that actually goes through as a strategic line, as a strategic argument, visual argument throughout all the works of the illustration of art that is summed up here. And I think for that reason, we might relate these works to key contemporaries of Antonio Diaz, from Blinky, Palermo, to post-minimalist painting, of course, to Arte Povera. This is an absolute key moment for late modernism in the Western world, an absolute acme accomplishment in Brazilian modern art. And we are so happy to be able to present this as the beginning of this new era of Nara Roesler in New York. I have realized that we have here at Nara Roesler working with the people from Bloco Gráfico in Sao Paulo, who have been revisiting the visual identity of the gallery that was set by the great Andrzej Stolarski at the beginning of the gallery, and they have, simplified and renewed and revisited, refreshed our visual identity. And actually, the new logo is two straight angles, racking and space. And it is exactly the same configuration of this installation, and somehow in echo also the signature shape in Antonio Diaz's work. That's because Nara Roesler is also Antonio Diaz's home, and we are very proud of that. So I might show you the second gallery where we have installed this control works by very important artists represented by the gallery. As a senior curatorial director of the gallery, I hope that this is the beginning of a series of shows. Not that we are going to do exactly the same kind of show. Of course, the next show is a solo show devoted to the great Amelia Toledo, and we have an exciting program for the gallery in New York. But I might hope that we might do Crosscuts 2 and Crosscuts 3 and Crosscuts 4 in the future, in any way that we might continue thinking of possibilities to present the entirety of the portfolio represented by Nara Roesler to the American and to the international audience here in the gallery in New York. And as this is the first step, first major step, first courageous step, against all the odds, against all the circumstances, which is a reason for optimism and for truly believing in the future and in the possibility of continuing doing things, and of the very importance and significance of having the real experience of art in order to wave and to go through very difficult times. So here we have works like Furiosa, Carl Guimarães, Lucia Koch, Abraham Palatini, Marcelo Silveira, Brigitte Lamartine, Bruno Dunia, and Paulo Bruschi. And we have installed a table where, in a one-on-one base, because the COVID protocols that I took off my mask, but we are here, we are all masked here and very carefully following the COVID protocols. But we can have here conversations with, in a one-on-one base with interlocutors, with artists, curators, museum directors, and we are also presenting an array of the very incredible number of publications that the gallery has initiated, produced, supported, funded on the artists that it represents. And concretely, in this case, we have catalogs by all these artists represented in here. I'd like to finish, to end this first walkthrough of Crosscuts and the opening of the gallery with this very, I think, important and significant, and also, I would say, also ironical and sarcastic work by the great Paulo Bruschi. These are all found objects. It's a series of Paulo Bruschi's been gathering and producing since the 1980s. It's an ongoing project. And so these are all found objects that he attributes to very important Brazilian artists. So we have a Volpi by Paulo Bruschi, or a Silvio Meireles by Paulo Bruschi, or a Ligia Pape by Paulo Bruschi, which is what you are looking at the moment. Ligia Clark by Paulo Bruschi, Nelson Werner by Paulo Bruschi, Krasper by Paulo Bruschi, Noitisica by Paulo Bruschi, and some international insertions like a beer bottle of beer that is branded Cobra, or a little CD-ROM disc, probably from the time of those were actually used. And notably this object that actually fascinates me, which is Giotto with mandioca flour, a whole allegory of anthropophagy, of Brazilian anthropophagy, and the possibility of constantly renewing tradition into new and striking forms, which is one of the beautiful potencies of art. So maybe our film directors, Cole and Rafa, might help us to convey some questions that you might have. If you want that we can go back to the Antonio Diaz installation if you have specific questions on board, so if you want to look at a specific question, or, so we are happy to answer them. And so many thanks for being with us. Be there for the next walkthroughs, which will happen every Thursday for the next 4 weeks. So, what is the word of the situation of the room?
Hello, everybody.
Here's the boss.
I'm here taking questions for Luis, so if anyone wants to send anything from either from our Instagram feed or from our YouTube feed, I will be here to pass it on to Luis and then have a chance to respond to these questions.
Yeah, we have these beautiful Sergio Rodriguez chairs and a beautiful Moreira Salles table, which is
Carlito is congratulating for the show. It says that the exhibition is beautiful.
We are here enlightened by your beautiful work every day.
Yes, yes. So we're going to have the follow-up of the installations in the first room. You talked about it in the beginning. Do you envision
Yeah, that's why I think it's when he sets a model that could be less stressful than a peak installation. No, people have to understand that we, the team in Brazil and here with Daniel, we have been preparing this for a year, and we all know. I think it's an overstatement. I mean, it's been a year with constant and sudden changes, and so the plan has changed so many times, and we were in a way, which I think it's today. I think it's a beautiful thing. We were working blind sometimes.
Yes.
We know what would be the situation today, and then you courageously let us.
In the void.
Exactly. We jumped in the void. We jumped in the emptiness of the fullness, and so it sets a possibility for a type of exhibition, and I think I've always believed in the fact that the same way Antonio Diaz was affirming that the fullness of meaning is never completed, that there is always someone to come that will change the reception of a work of art. Works of art change their meaning into the degree that they are in connection with other works of art. And that is not in the program. It's not in the program of the artists that made them. That is, I think, for me, the constant experience in museums. That you are preparing an exhibition, and you are studying a work, and suddenly you see these juxtapositions, these encounters, and then you discover new meanings. The thing unveils to a different path, a new path. And I think it's a type of exhibition that I like to do because it implies carefully looking at the works and following what the works are telling you that you might do. And so, as I was saying, it's not that we are going to do that all the time, because that also requires a lengthy preparation, but it's a model. And it's a model that actually allows us to present variety of works. And I think the ambition, Daniel, is to bring all of our
it would be great to revisit in the future this model. I have a question here.
Yeah.
So we got a question from Ana Lívia Cordeiro.
Ooh, Ana Lívia.
Yes. So she says, when in the last work by Antonio that took out the square from the painting, do you think that it could have a narrative content to it?
That's a very consequent and complex question. I think that my impression is that Antonio, there is a whole process of reduction in the most serious meaning of the word. Phenomenologists call that epoche, which is suspension, like suddenly you put in suspense a lot of things in order to look at the factuality, almost the raw factuality of an experience. Then you put in suspense what you knew or what you think you knew. And I think there is a whole process of suspension and there is a whole process of reduction to the minimality of elements in Antonio Díaz's work. That doesn't mean that there is no narrative, because there is narrative. I think if we look at the entire works that Antonio made, transforming and using, Italian press and American press on the Nixon years, we have a narrative there. We installed last year in the early That's About series, which, in addition to the element of reading the political context, the American political context, comes from a form, from a practice in China of announcing public announcements and religion. So, yes, I would say that narrative is reduced to the limit of its emptiness, but also to the minimality of its fullness in this series. I don't think that there is a narrative in the sense that, historia, as the art historians talk about what is the historia embedded in a painting. There is not a period that, X opened the door, then X died. No, it's not in that sense. But there is, what impresses me with the work of Antonio Díaz is the amazing capacity that he had to produce open works, to set, let's say, formal and theoretical and maybe narrative implications that then get suspended, that nobody can definitely answer. But if you think of that phrase that he inscribed in this installation, as well as in another installation that is a set of painting stretcher, someone position that I think it was a bit dark original. If you think of that phrase, that all reduction of enlargement is a matter of accommodation. If you apply to the notion of narrative, that narrative, all matter of narrative is also issued or related to accommodation and to enlargement and reduction. He went to the reduction of narrative. That doesn't mean that he annihilated narrative in the work. But if you think of that, and then you think of what our critiques were calling until very recently relational aesthetics. This is the conceptual basis of relational aesthetics. I am not saying that this is relational aesthetics in the sense which Tiavanija might do, or Gordon Matta Clark open a restaurant where everybody goes to eat the soup, the collective soup. But the idea that it is in the relationship vis-a-vis someone who is about to come that the work gets temporarily to achieve its fullness of meaning, only relatively and only temporarily, is the conceptual basic of relational aesthetics. And I think that Antonio is in that sense a foundational moment for that.
I have another question from Eric Friedman. Can you talk more about masks, both as it relates to the historical and contemporary context?
About?
Masks.
Masks. Ah, wow. Well, you know, probably the beginning of the very primal form of painting for the Western age of, let's say, post-classic civilization is a mask, or is a piece of cloth where you see fading a face, which is the face of Christ. That is the painting of paintings after the crumbling down of the classic civilization, the Greek-Roman civilization, and great art historians such as Hans Belting, the German art historian, have followed the thread from the vera icona, from the very true icon, which is the prodigiously portrait of Christ in the cloth, up to Malevich. When you think of the I actually have been during the quarantine reading Belton and reading Malevich autobiography and planning to write an essay on this. But that frontal static face that we call the Salvator Mundi, the face, the frontal face of Christ, either in the Veronica, in the Vera Icona, in the cloth, in the saint cloth, or in the very multitudinous variations of icons. When Malevich paints the white monochrome on black and installed it at the Tretiakov Gallery in 1915, he installed it at the superior corner of the room where rural Orthodox used to place the face of Christ. So that white monochrome is the metamorphic transformation of the white cloth, where you were seeing the prodigious fading face of Christ at the beginning of the Christian age. From there to today, masks, the power of covering a face, the power of showing a face, the idea that a painting looks at you as much as you look at a painting, that actually any visual element is looking at you as much as you are looking at it. The very central notion is the face as an operator of gaze. And I very much think that Antonio was absolutely conscious about that facing a painting is somehow facing a face. And that face has the power of hiding things, showing things, covering and uncovering, as he said in his work. So then you have the whole, if you go to ancient times, and you have, imago for the Latins. They call imagos. Imagos were the facial portraits of the people who have died, that they put in the houses. And persona, the notion of where comes from the idea of person, the notion of person, is the theatrical name of face, of a mask, sorry. So these dialectics between, face, the funeral portrait, the face covering the face, painting covering the truth, all that could be articulated around the notion of face and around the notion of mask. So it's very important. We see that bundle. So this is, in a way, you might think, if I might be adventurous, that is a Pompeian ancient graffiti of two faces. But actually it's a very contemporary painting, but that's face. And if you think of Brigida Baltar's amazing weavings based on the color of her skin and the skin of her black husband, that is also something related to the frontality of bodies and to the facing potentiality of bodies. And so on and so on.
Great. I think with this amazing exposition about mass, we could start wrapping it up. We're reaching maybe 50 minutes of this conversation.
Okay. We may announce next week, no?
Yes, please.
It's going to be a conversation around the second chapter of the show with works by Paul Ramirez Jonas and Bernard Reale. And we'll show you the installation probably through video. And we are very much hoping to have a conversation with Paul.
Okay.
On the meaning of this series of works. And I will be giving my interpretation of Bernard's works.
Bernard is listening to us. She's,
Bernard, a big hug to Bernard.
Yeah. So Bernard, we'll see you here next week. Palomo.
Palomo.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Luis.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Paul. Wonderful operation manager of the shooting. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you to the team in Brazil, Rafa, Olivia, the curatorial unit in Sao Paulo. They are so helpful, Rafa, dealing with these publications, and the team here. Joanna, Frederic, Francesco, and Cole, which is a great team to work with.
Great. We'll see you next week. Same time.
And big hugs to Nara. Okay.
Okay.